Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Executive Branch Video 5. Today we're going to talk about the historical changes in the power of the presidency. And we're going to spend some time in class on a specific activity dealing with executive power and its limits. Okay, so today let's start talking about executive power. So first of all, if you can think all the way back to talking about the Articles of Confederation. One of the things that the Articles of Confederation was lacking was a strong executive. So think about why we would need a strong executive and answer that question when it pops up. So the sources of executive power, where did the presidents get their legitimacy to govern? Of course, the Constitution is where most of that, all of that authority comes from. So the Constitution, basically, we're looking at Article 2. Remember, Article 2 sets up the executive branch. And one specific part of Article 2 is called the Wild Card Clause. And it basically says something along the lines of, the executive power of the United States shall be vested in a president. That's it. Now, it doesn't tell us anywhere what executive power is and what executive power isn't. So because of that, it's sometimes called the wild card clause, because if you can think to where, like when you're playing Uno as a kid, if you get a wild card, the wild card can be whatever you want it to be, okay? So the presidents throughout history have used the wild card clause in a variety of different situations. So also, the personal exercise of power is another source of authority for the president. And a great example of that is this guy named Thomas Jefferson. Again, someone you may have heard of at some point in time. Thomas Jefferson is well known for purchasing the Louisiana Territory. Now, the Louisiana Territory and its addition to the United States is a pretty big deal for us living in Missouri because we are part of that territory. Now, Thomas Jefferson, he's one of the founders, one of the contributors to the Constitution. He wrote the Declaration of Independence. He kind of knows, about American government. So whenever it came time, whenever Napoleon basically says, hey man, I got this really good deal for you. You want to buy a third of the continent? Thomas Jefferson kind of has a little bit of a crisis, internal conflict going on, because nowhere in the Constitution does it say presidents can buy land, but it doesn't specifically say presidents can't buy land. So Thomas Jefferson kind of interprets the Constitution to say, it says I have to govern territory. So because I can govern territory, that also means I can buy territory. So that was one way that a president was able to stretch the power of the president. But it was kind of a good thing. Moving on then to presidential powers that come from the immediate needs of the nation. So sometimes we have something going on in the United States and it's like, wow, the president really has to act because he's the leader of our country, so he's really got to do something. So a good example of this comes from the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln, of course, was the president during the Civil War. And something that he did that doesn't really get a lot of attention, especially in our history classes, is that he suspended what was called the writ of habeas corpus. So if you can think back to when we talked about habeas corpus with our Constitution unit, this is a Latin phrase, and it literally means to have body. That word corpus means, sounds like corpse, body. So Abraham Lincoln suspended the writ of habeas corpus, which means if you were like a Confederate officer and you were arrested, you could be thrown in jail and just left there. Not given a trial, not given a chance to, defend yourself or anything. But while we could look back at that now and say, woo, that was a little much there, Mr. President, Abraham Lincoln felt that that's something that he needed to do to protect the nation at that time. We can also look back to FDR and look at all of the New Deal economic programs that he pushed through. If you can think back to your American history days, you probably talked about the alphabet soup programs, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the TVA, and the AAA, and all of those different organizations. Those are part of FDR's New Deal programs that he basically pushed through. Now, did he necessarily have the constitutional authority to do all of that? Probably not, but he did it because he was addressing the immediate needs of the nation, okay? Another source of presidential power comes from the mandate of the people. This term mandate kind of sounds like mandatory. And if something is mandatory, that means that it has to be done. So presidents throughout history have used television, have used radio, have used newspapers and other forms of media to address the mandate of the people. Okay, And one of the best presidents when it comes to the use of media is this guy named Ronald Reagan. Maybe you've heard of him. Ronald Reagan was often called a great communicator because of his ability to meet the mandate of the people through the medium of television. And prior to becoming a politician, Ronald Reagan was an actor. So he was very comfortable being in front of the camera, very comfortable in that situation, and was able to many times address the needs of the people, kind of calm the nation and bring us together during times of crisis. Some other sources or limits of presidential power, I could say. The president is, of course, limited by Congress. It's limited by Congress in a few different ways. I have listed here the congressional override, which is that last part of the bill to law process. If Congress doesn't like what the president has vetoed, then they can override his veto. That's a limit. Also, if Congress doesn't like a specific appointment, a presidential appointment, the Senate specifically, of course, can limit the president's authority by saying, no, that person's not going to be in the position that you want to be in. He's also limited by the federal courts through that concept of judicial review. What is that? The court's power to say what is whack. Drop the mic, walk away. Of course, FDR realized also during his time in office that he, in fact, was limited as well. A lot of his New Deal economic programs were actually struck down by the courts because they were considered an overreach of executive authority. So, he tried, but it didn't always work. They are also limited by the bureaucracy. And this is a word that you probably need to know. That term bureaucracy refers to all of the non-elected people who serve in the executive branch. So the bureaucracy could include like the cabinet, because we don't elect those people. It could refer to people like the White House staff or people who work in the executive office of the president. So all of those different forces can come together and can kind of limit the president's power. So if the president wants to do something that's kind of crazy, somebody might step in and the cabinet and say, ooh, we might want to step back and rethink this, Mr. President. And then, of course, we also have public opinions. We hope that as the American people, that our opinion is going to influence our president. And I will go ahead and stop there. If you have any questions, let me know.